Tron wasn't born a blockbuster. It was a gamble that looked like a glitch. But behind the neon and the glow, it was rejection at every turn. 3 studios turned it down and mocked the idea. Even Disney's own animators refused to touch it, and the Academy called its effects a trick and shut it out. These are 20 weird facts about Tron, and hidden inside the grid and the games, Pong flickered in the circuitry like a ghost. Number 1. It all started with a dot, a white square bouncing endlessly across a black screen in Pong. For most people in the 1970s, it was just a simple distraction. 2 paddles, 1 ball, nothing more. But when Steven Lisberger saw it, something clicked. He didn't see a toy. He saw a door. What if that tiny bouncing pixel was only the surface of something bigger? What if inside the screen there were arenas, warriors, and entire civilizations built from code? Lisberger became obsessed. He plastered his Boston animation studio with neon posters, sketching a glowing world where circuits became cities and programs were alive. From the most primitive arcade machine of its era, he imagined a new mythology, one that would leap from a quarter-fed cabinet to Disney's biggest gamble. Tron was born from Pong, a digital prophecy sparked by a dot. Number 2. Before glowing suits and light cycles, Tron was pitched as something very different, a full-length animated feature. Director Steven Lisberger imagined it closer to a cartoon than a live-action spectacle, a wild neon fantasia that never left the drawing board. Early concept reels showed digital warriors sketched like Saturday morning heroes, moving through hand-painted landscapes instead of computer grids. But Disney grew bolder. They gambled on combining live actors with practical sets, animation, and brand new computer imagery. The result was stranger, riskier, and unlike anything audiences had seen before. What began as a cartoon evolved into a hybrid experiment, half flesh, half fantasy. And in the process, Tron carved out a visual style that no studio had dared attempt. Number 3. When Steven Lisberger carried his Tron pitch into Hollywood, most studios couldn't stop laughing. Warner Brothers, MGM, Columbia, they all turned him away. Executives saw video games as noisy toys for kids, not a canvas for cinema. The idea of people zapped into a computer grid sounded absurd in 1982. Arcades might have been packed, but the suits believed the craze would fade before the film even hit theaters. The only place that listened was the one with the most to lose, Disney. By the early 80s, the studio was staggering. The Black Hole had flopped, The Fox and the Hound underperformed. Kids weren't racing to see Disney anymore. They were racing to arcades, or to theaters showing Star Wars and Raiders of the Lost Ark. Disney needed something bold, something futuristic, to lure them back. So they took a $17 million gamble on a rookie director and a neon fever dream everyone else called insane. The film didn't save Disney that summer. E.T. and Star Trek II crushed it at the box office. But Tron planted something more important. It proved computers could be part of cinema's language. That risk became the seed for Pixar, for Toy Story, for Frozen. The gamble that looked like desperation became the first spark of Disney's digital empire. Number 4. On screen, Jeff Bridges made Kevin Flynn a rebel hacker with charm and swagger, but the casting grid almost looked very different. At first, Disney courted Peter O'Toole, fresh off his towering reputation from Lawrence of Arabia. They wanted him for Dillinger, the cold corporate villain. But O'Toole shocked them. He didn't want to sneer in a suit. He wanted to play Tron himself. Imagine it. The face of cinematic grandeur suddenly suited up in glowing armor. Disney balked, fearing audiences wouldn't buy their British legend as a digital gladiator. So they passed, giving Dillinger and Sark to David Warner, who brought the icy menace he'd sharpened in Time Bandits. The surprises didn't stop there. Debbie Harry, the face of Blondie and queen of new wave cool, auditioned for Laura. At the time, she was chasing Hollywood roles, already stung after her Bond theme For Your Eyes Only was rejected. She lost out here too, but bounced back with Cronenberg's Videodrome. Meanwhile, Bridges won the Flynn role, grounding the chaos with boyish rebellion. In another universe, Tron could have starred a rock icon and one of Britain's greatest actors as the glowing warrior. Instead, it forged its own eccentric ensemble, a cast as unpredictable as the grid itself. Number 5. For a movie called Tron, you'd expect the title character to drive the story, but instead, the spotlight stayed on Jeff Bridges' Kevin Flynn, the rebellious programmer hacking into Encom to reclaim his stolen work. Tron, played by Bruce Boxleitner, had some of the film's most dazzling moments: disc duels, light cycle battles, and the glowing armor every kid remembered. Yet when the final showdown came, it was Flynn, not Tron, who sacrificed himself against the Master Control program. Fans left puzzled. Why name a movie after the character who wasn't even the savior? Disney never explained, but the irony stuck. In a film all about identity and recognition, the title belonged to the hero who didn't win the fight. Number 6. The glowing discs weren't just a visual gimmick. They came from Steven Lisberger's strict rule. He refused to arm his digital warriors with guns. Hollywood was already full of shootouts, and he didn't want kids walking out of theaters pretending to fire pistols. Instead, he gave them discs, inspired by Frisbees. Knowing the worst a kid could do was thwack a friend in the backyard. What could have been laser battles turned into aerial duels, with light-slicing discs defining Tron's identity. In avoiding guns, Lisberger created one of sci-fi's most unique weapons, a toy every kid could imagine holding, and a symbol that made Tron instantly stand apart. Number 7. In the early 80s, blockbuster sci-fi rarely gave women more than a side glance. They were assistants, love interests, or faces in the background. But in Tron, Cindy Morgan's Yori broke that pattern. She wasn't just there to react. She joined Flynn and Tron inside the grid, helping hack, scheme, and fight against the Master Control program. Morgan pushed to make Yori more than the girl in the glowing suit, and her presence gave the film a spark of balance. She wasn't Ripley from Alien, but in a movie dominated by digital gladiators, Yori proved that women could carry intelligence and courage into the arena. Decades later, she's still remembered as a rare heroine in an era that often left women standing on the sidelines. Number 8. Inside Disney, Tron sparked rebellion before a single frame was shot. The studio's veteran animators, the old guard who had built Snow White and Cinderella, looked at Steven Lisberger's plan to use computers and flatly refused. To them, pixels were a threat, not a tool. They believed computers would kill hand-drawn animation, turning decades of artistry into obsolete code. Some flat out boycotted the project, refusing to work on a movie they thought would bury their craft. Lisberger didn't back down. If Disney wouldn't supply artists, he'd look elsewhere. He brought in outsiders with imaginations as bold as his own. Sid Mead, the futurist who had just finished designing the neon sprawl of Blade Runner, and Jean Mobius-Giraud, the French comic book legend whose surreal line work had already redefined sci-fi on the page. Together they sketched glowing warriors, impossible landscapes, and armor that looked like both priestly robes and alien machinery. What Disney's own animators rejected as cheating became the film's blueprint. Moebius and Mead transformed the grid into something mythic, a digital dreamscape that looked nothing like the Disney fairy tales of old. Ironically, the very artist who walked away left space for visionaries who created the future. Number 9. Before Steven Lisberger's studio even began shooting, Tron was already rewriting Hollywood's rules. Literally. Co-writer Bonnie McBird wasn't just a screenwriter, she was a computer enthusiast. Years earlier at Stanford, she'd fed punched cards into a PDP-11 and even played a primitive proto-Pong game made of blinking lights. So when she sat down to draft Tron, she didn't reach for a typewriter. She linked up with Xerox PARC, the legendary research lab inventing the future of computing. Using an acoustic coupler, McBird transmitted pages to PARC, where she edited them on the Alto, one of the world's first personal computers. To keep executives calm, she printed them in a font that looked like old typewriter Courier, hiding the number that she was quietly making history. She later said she might have been the first Hollywood writer to craft and revise a script entirely on a computer. The connections went deeper. The character Alan Bradley was inspired by PARC pioneer Alan Kay, and the NCOM lab set was modeled directly after PARC's real offices. Tron wasn't just about computers on screen. Its very script was born inside the machine world it portrayed. In 1982, that was science fiction. Today, it's the way every script in Hollywood is written. Number 10. Tron's neon world didn't just glow on screen, it echoed in sound. Disney turned to Wendy Carlos, a pioneer who had already redefined electronic music with A Clockwork Orange and The Shining. One of Hollywood's first openly trans composers, Carlos fused chilly synthesizers with swelling orchestral lines, creating a score that felt both mechanical and human. At times it was eerie, like circuitry humming in the dark. At others it was sweeping, as if a symphony had been wired into the grid itself. The blend unsettled audiences, unsure if they were hearing the future or a dream. Decades later, no blockbuster score has ever sounded quite like it. Tron's music wasn't just background, it was a ghost in the machine, haunting every flicker of light. Number 11. In the middle of Tron's glowing battles and corporate intrigue, a tiny yellow intruder slipped in, Pac-Man. By 1982, he wasn't just a video game. He was a cultural tidal wave. Saturday morning cartoons, t-shirts, cereal, even a hit pop song. Kids lined up in arcades to feed him quarters by the millions. So when Disney set out to build a digital universe, the filmmakers decided to slip the biggest icon of the arcade age straight into the grid. Look closely at Sark's glowing command console, and you'll spot him. There, chomping along the corner of the screen, is a miniature Pac-Man sprite, endlessly gobbling down dots while the villain plots world domination. It wasn't just a gag. It was a wink at the audience, proof that Tron understood the culture it came from. The irony is sharp. Pac-Man's world was simple. 4 ghosts, a maze, and a hunger that never stopped. But inside Tron, he became part of something bigger, a digital cosmos that stretched beyond anything kids had seen in an arcade. Decades later, the cameo remains one of the most famous Easter eggs in film history. On the grid, heroes battled for humanity's humanity's future. And in the corner, Pac-Man kept doing what he always did, eating, forever hungry. Number 12. Most fans think the light cycler at Shanghai Disneyland in 2016 was the grid's first leap into theme parks, but Disney had already tested it decades earlier. In 1982, the very year Tron hit theaters, at Disneyland in Anaheim, the humble people mover suddenly became a digital thrill. Imagine riding a slow-moving tram through Tomorrowland, only for the tunnel to erupt in neon light. The attraction was called The World of Tron. Guests glided into what seemed like an ordinary projection space. Then the calm narrator's voice shifted, replaced by a cold computerized growl. "You have invaded the Master Control Program's domain." Walls lit up with racing light cycles that streaked across the tunnel, their trails flickering like sparks in the dark. The effect was primitive compared to today's rides, but for kids in 1982, it was like being derezzed in real life. And then, silence. As the tram exited, the voice returned one last time. "You have escaped Tron's game grid, for now." It wasn't fast, it wasn't high-tech, but it left riders shaken and buzzing. Long before coasters and VR, the first Tron ride proved the franchise could leap from the screen into the real world and take fans with it. Number 13. For kids who walked out of theaters in 1982, the name Bruce Boxleitner was burned into memory as Tron, the digital knight who fought with discs of light. But just a year later, fans switched on their TVs and saw him somewhere completely different. In 1983, Boxleitner was suddenly headlining a CBS primetime series, Scarecrow and Mrs. King, as suave spy Lee "Scarecrow" Stetson. The show ran for 4 seasons, full of Cold War intrigue and undercover missions. For young viewers, it was surreal. Their glowing grid warrior had stepped into trench coats and car chases. To them, it wasn't just another network drama. It was proof that Tron hadn't derezzed after the box office stumble. He'd simply slipped into a new disguise, fighting his battles weekly on television. Number 14. In another summer, Tron might have been a phenomenon, but in 1982, it walked into a battlefield. Steven Spielberg's E.T. was rewriting box office history, drawing families back to theaters again and again. Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan gave fans the most emotional voyage of the Enterprise yet, and darker visions like Blade Runner and The Thing fought for sci-fi's edgier crowd. Tron, with its glowing grids and talk of programs, felt cold next to aliens with hearts or heroes with nostalgia. The irony? Those very neon landscapes would outlast many of its rivals. It may have lost the summer, but in the long run, it was Tron that pointed to the future. Number 15. In 1982, no actor had ever walked inside a computer. Matte paintings and miniatures were familiar tricks, but Tron dared to go further, asking Jeff Bridges and his cast to perform on bare black stages, guided only by Steven Lisberger's voice painting invisible landscapes. They swung discs at empty space, imagined wireframe towers that weren't there, and trusted the machines would fill in the glow later. But the truth was stranger. Most of the digital world wasn't digital at all. Whole city skylines were hand-built as towering miniatures, lined with fiber optics and plexiglass, then shot with optical cameras to mimic computer light. In a film that promised the future, it was carpenters and model makers who carried much of the weight. And when Disney submitted the work for Oscars consideration, the Academy scoffed. Computers, they said, were cheating. No nomination, no recognition. The irony lingers. The techniques dismissed as fake in 1982 became the very foundation of modern blockbusters. Tron wasn't rewarded for its gamble. It was exiled for arriving a generation too soon. Number 16. On the big screen, Tron barely covered costs, but in the arcade, it became a phenomenon. Disney rushed out a cabinet game to tie in with the release, offering 4 minigames: tanks, light cycles, disc battles, and the MCP cone. The cabinet glowed neon, pulsed with electronic sound, and stood taller than most kids pumping quarters into it. By the end of its run, the arcade version had raked in over $45 million in coin drops, more than the movie itself earned at the global box office. For a film about humans lost inside machines, the irony was perfect. Tron became immortal not as cinema, but as the very game its world was built to imagine. Number 17. When Tron premiered in the summer of 1982, Disney gambled $17 million, a massive sum for a rookie director's neon experiment. But the gamble didn't pay off. Critics sneered, calling it style over substance, and audiences turned to warmer stories. The film limped to around $50 million worldwide, a disappointment by blockbuster standards of the era. Disney quietly shelved the dream, treating it as another misfire in a decade full of them. But the grid didn't die. On VHS tapes and cable reruns, a different story unfolded. Kids rewound light cycle duels until the tape warped. Teens memorized the glowing disc battles frame by frame. In bedrooms and basements, Tron lived on, a cult fire spreading outside theaters. Decades later, the same film once mocked as hollow was hailed as visionary. In 2010, Tron was enshrined assigned in the U.S. National Film Registry as culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant. What began as a stumble became prophecy. Disney had built a digital legend. It just took the future to catch up. Number 18. The cult of Tron didn't end in 1982. It only grew louder online. By the early 2000s, the face of that cult was Jay Maynard, dubbed Tron Guy, for the glowing spandex suit he stitched together in tribute to the original film. His homemade costume turned him into one of the internet's first viral celebrities, proof that a supposed Disney flop had carved out true believers decades later. But when Tron Legacy arrived in 2010, Maynard tried to celebrate by wearing the suit to a theater in Minnesota and was thrown out for being too distracting. Fans exploded at the irony. The man who kept the 1982 film alive in fandom was denied entry to its sequel. Maynard later saw the movie, nearly in tears, because for him, The Grid wasn't just a sequel. It was the world he'd been carrying since 1982. Number 19. In 1982, Tron may have stumbled at the box office, but in arcades and game studios, it was planting seeds. The wireframe highways, glowing grids, and identity disc battles weren't just movie spectacle. They were the first real blueprint of cyberspace on screen. Kids who grew up rewinding those VHS tapes became the developers who later built the digital worlds of Halo, Mass Effect, Kingdom Hearts, and countless others. Bungie's designers admitted the neon architecture of Tron influenced the sleek halls of the Halo ring worlds. Square Enix wove Tron's legacy directly into Kingdom Hearts 2, where players fought heartless inside a digitized NCOM mainframe. Even BioWare looked back at the grid when shaping Mass Effect's Citadel, a city where humanity and machines blur in luminous geometry. The film's influence wasn't just aesthetic, it rewired imaginations. Tron suggested that behind every screen was a hidden universe, waiting to be explored. That single leap of imagination turned a cult sci-fi film into the ancestor of modern gaming. The irony? While critics in 1982 dismissed it as empty glow, the very glow became the light that guided an entire generation of game designers into the future. Number 20. When Tron Legacy divided critics in 2010, dazzling in visuals but shaky in story, Disney looked for a way to keep the grid alive. Their answer wasn't another film, but a bold experiment on the small screen. In 2012, Tron Uprising debuted on Disney XD, fusing anime-style art with cutting-edge CGI. Its design stunned fans. Jagged skylines, glowing highways, battles that felt like digital ballet. At its center was Beck, a young mechanic turned reluctant rebel, voiced by Elijah Wood, still glowing in pop culture from The Lord of the Rings. His quiet defiance gave the series its heart, a freedom fighter rising inside the system itself. Critics raved about its ambition. The voice cast included Mandy Moore, Lance Henriksen, even Paul Rubens. It looked sleek, it sounded epic, and it deepened the mythology of the grid. But ratings lagged. After just one season, Disney pulled the plug, leaving storylines unfinished and fans frustrated. Over a decade later, many still call Uprising the most daring sequel the franchise ever had. A show too strange, too smart, too beautiful for its time. And yet, the grid endures. Disney has revived the code again, with Tron Ares officially slated for release in October 2025. More than 40 years after the original Neon Dream, the system keeps rebooting. Some programs, it seems, never duress. Bonus fact: ask a computer fan and they'll tell you Tron was a geeky in-joke, the basic programming command for trace on. But Steven Lisberger admitted he never meant it that way. He pulled the name from the word electronic, long before learning about its accidental tech meaning. The coincidence gave Tron an extra layer of street cred with coders, turning a neon fantasy into something that felt authentic. In truth, the title wasn't born from debugging. It was born from a dream to electrify cinema. Fate just made sure the geeks loved it twice as much. In 1982, Tron was laughed off as an expensive experiment. Too bright, too strange, too obsessed with computers nobody understood. But time rewrote the story. What bombed in theaters became a digital prophecy, inspiring video games, sequels, and even theme park rides. The same critics who sneered now look back and call it visionary. Because Tron wasn't just about glowing suits or light cycles. It was about daring to imagine a world inside the machine before anyone else believed it was possible. If this one still lights up your memory, drop a comment. Tell us what cult classic we should jack into next. Because 40 years later, the grid still hums, alive in every game, every frame of CGI, and every dream that refuses to duress.